I'm going to be talking about the techniques that are discussed and additional techniques that are in the book Sketching Nature. I'm starting on this section first, as what I would like to concentrate on, because techniques are key to your success, really. So this starts at around about page 22 in the book, with this opening feature showing you various sorts of sketchbook pages, watercolour techniques, graphite techniques, and so on. The section that we start with is the observational drawing, and observational drawing is about working to draw subjects from life by measuring them, really, and getting an accurate drawing. So something like this rose leaf here, we could do a drawing of. And you can see in other sketchbook examples of some of my this is very old sketchbooks of a mock orange plant. So there's different types of drawings that I've done. So I've started off with line drawings that are measured, and then I've moved on to some tonal studies of it. So rendering the image using various grades of pencil to make a more three-dimensional looking portrayal of it, before moving on and making some rough colour studies. This is one of my early sketchbooks, and it's the same approach as I use today that I used back sort of 10 years or so ago. And I'm going to work through those various stages with you as part of my technique. So going back, we're starting with line drawing. And I've also got a little bit of tone on this one as well. But I start with the basic features of the plant. So I start with a portrait of the flower, maybe a side view of the flower, what's going on in the centre of the flower, the different shapes of petals, whatever you have, and portraits of leaves and various stages, sizes of development, or whatever your plant has. Plants may have bulbs, roots that you want to include, but start with all the different individual features of the plant first. And then you can develop onto drawings with perspective before moving on to tonal studies. And you should really do it in that order. Master your line drawing before moving on to your tone and colour. So going back to our drawing of the flower and leaves here, it's very simple basic drawings. You can see that what I've done is used height and width every time for everything, actually, height, width. I also find the widest point on a leaf and just get some basic dimensions in first. And the easiest way of doing that is to use a pair of dividers. These are quite small ones, but you can get larger ones. Most of the subjects that I do are relatively small, but I do have like a larger pair of dividers as well. And so if I was to draw a leaf, such as a rose leaf, I'm just going to remove that. I start off with that portrait idea. So that leaf is positioned in front of me. And I'm going to measure the divider, hold the dividers sort of directly in front of it at eye view for me. Measure from the top to the bottom to get the full height, and I can mark that on my paper like so. And I'll use a HB or a H grade pencil for that kind of work. So I get the height. This is a very simple interpretation of how to do a measured drawing. Get the leaf. You don't have to flatten the leaf. If you flatten the leaf like a herbarium specimen, it's not really going to look very natural. So just put it into position a little bit as it should sit, but not flattening parts. And again, don't move these dividers in and out. You hold them on the same plane as though there's almost like a piece of glass in front of you. So you measure then the width here, and then you can go on. There we have the width. Just widen that out a little bit until I get the right width. It's difficult to show you exactly on camera because what I see is slightly different from what you see. But there you can see I have got the just about got the width there. Just in a bit more, and a bit more. And that's about it. So that's given us the basic height and the basic width. And you can draw in a box then, just to mark in the parts of the leaf. And then you can go on to measure other parts. So you can measure the same, the height, and not moving these dividers closer or further away, just holding them on the same plane, the height of that top leaf and the width of that top leaf. So height, width, and the same all the way down. You can measure the distance here to this first leaf node, this compound leaf. So it's got leaflets. These are not individual leaves. This is all one compound leaf, and these are the individual leaflets. So you can measure the distance between that top leaflet and the two opposite ones here. And again, the same again, height and width, and so on, measuring down again to this point. And that will give us an outline drawing of the leaf on the page. So plot all those points in. So after the first height and width measurement, you can take your ruler and you can just mark in where the outline of the leaf is. And here's one that I did earlier. And then once I've got the outline in, so it would have been all drawn like this initially, and pay careful attention to the vein, because quite often people curve veins that are not curved. So if you look at this vein here, for example, this is a different rose leaf, obviously it's bigger, but if you look at this, it's really quite straight. But quite often people imagine that these veins are more curved than they are. Again, it's really quite a straight vein. Straight vein, straight vein. And this one's tilting slightly to the side, and I'm just going to pull it forward a little bit. But again, it's a fairly straight vein. So observe things like this carefully. And then you need to look at the distance between the small secondary veins. So this, the mid one, the midrib we have, and then we have these secondary veins here. And you can look at the distance again. And the best way I find of plotting in veins so you don't get lost is to start from the middle or thereabouts, or just below or just above. So if I hold my dividers at the top here and measure the point from the tip to the base of that vein there, and then I can plot that in on my drawing, and then do the same thing from the top but to the top of that vein there. So it's come from the top to that. I can plot at that point and then draw the curve in. And then it's easier to work out rather than working from the vein at the top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, to start in the middle and work either side. So you can carry on then plotting in the distance between those veins and just drawing them in like that. So I'll show you this in more detail, but I just want to give you an overview of how you do a basic observational drawing. And the other question that I quite often get asked is how many veins to put in. Because obviously if you take a photograph of that leaf close up and blow it up, you will see hundreds and hundreds of veins. But it doesn't look like the leaf. If you draw too many veins in, it starts to look nothing like the leaf. So what you have to look for are the main veins, the most obvious ones first. So as I said before, the midrib will go in, and then you can see where the secondary veins are, and a few indications of the tertiary ones. They're kind of fading out a bit here, but look at the type of connections at the top as well. How they connect before the margin. They're not all going to the margin, they're connecting up before that margin, here to here. Look at the shapes within them very carefully and make sure you get those connections right. And you can see that in this drawing there. For example, here's the shapes meeting before the margin, and then some veins going off from there. The secondary veins, we've got some smaller ones in between, and an indication of the tertiary veins. So basically it's what you see with the naked eye, not what you draw from a screen. And this is the problem quite often with drawing from photographs or on screen. And I always recommend you work from life, because if you don't, you won't get a good understanding of your subject and you'll probably misinterpret parts of it. Drawing from life is not easy when you're first starting out, but it gets easy with practice. And the more you put it off by working from photographs, the more difficult it remains. Whereas once you start drawing, you'll find actually it's much easier. And when it comes to perspective, then you've got a whole different thing to deal with, but it's no different. You hold those dividers on a plane in front of you, and you measure height. That's our maximum height there, and you measure the width in exactly the same way, and then you start looking at angles Look at the angle from there to there. Look at the kind of distance between it. Look at the angles here, here. And you can measure the width of all of these leaves and plot it in from life. If it's sitting in front of you and you have it clamped into something, you can measure all of those parts using your dividers and plot them in quite easily on a sheet of paper without resorting to photographs. If you resort to photographs for something like that, you get photographic distortion. So I'm filming here with a camera. If I pull this leaf to the front here, it'll start to distort. If I was to take a photograph of that leaf now, these leaves at the front will be far too big because it's distorted by the camera, because these are closer to the lens than these at the back. It's completely wrong if it's like that. It has to be drawn from life and not from a photograph. I'm just going to run through this very quick drawing of a rose leaflet. It's from a dog rose, and we've got the whole compound leaf here. I've measured that height with my dividers. Well, there's the whole length of my dividers actually, almost, and plotted it in top and bottom. And the width, maximum width is there. Mark that in and draw a bounding box to hold it, contain it all in. Don't worry if you go a little bit outside or a little bit inside. You can get a slight sort of movement in the leaf. I've also just lightly held the leaf down. I've put a bit of tape here, and I've also put a little bit of white tack on the back of the leaf, just on the leaflets, to just hold them into position, but not flattening it. It's sitting quite naturally there. I don't want to flatten it too much. Now bear in mind that the position I'm sitting at compared to the view of the camera, which is straight above, is slightly different. So what I'm drawing and what you see will be a little bit different, but it's just to give you an idea of the process. After I've done that, I start to mark in. So imagine this is also in this box, and you can look roughly that that's near to the centre of the box. If that was to be in a box, this leaflet at the top is also quite near the centre. It's just leaning over slightly. So I've measured that again, the height and the width of that leaflet, and then drawn it in. I'm just going over it a little bit, plotted it in. Now if you need to, you can measure widths and check them elsewhere on the actual leaflet to see if they're accurate enough. And I've gone down, and what I've done gradually, working on these leaflets, looking at these angles first. So plotting in the angle of each leaf, and you can use your divider for that as well. Just hold it and look at that angle to see what it's like. Also, make sure you have this width here correct. Measure that. Make sure this is not too narrow or too wide. It's quite narrow, and I've already plotted that in. It's best if you get that in first, and then you can add the leaflets to it. So looking at the angles, so I've put in the angles and the angles here. This one I'm working on now, so I want the length of that leaflet here, after plotted the angle in from here to there, and that width around about there. We're not worrying about the serrations at the moment. We'll deal with them later. We start drawing and trying to put in serrations at this early stage, you're just going to get caught up in that and lose sight of what you're actually drawing. So don't worry about the serrations. So again, we've already marked our width there, which makes the job much easier. And this lovely steep one here, very steep angle, round about there. And I can check my position from the main stem to the tip of the leaf here, and how far apart they are. And it is about what I've marked there. The leaflet stopping just short. Just check that length again. It's there. Okay, maximum width around about there. And so we can plot that last one in. There will be corrections and alterations as you draw this leaf. That's perfectly normal, but keep the pencil weight light so that when you make those corrections, it's easy to erase. And use a putty eraser rather than a hard eraser, because a hard eraser damages your paper more. That's roughly. Also got this width here. This one's moved down a little bit since I drew it, but it's okay. Okay, so let's just go with that for now. Right, so that's our basic structure of the leaflet. It's all attached to that central stem, and the whole leaf is now in place. So how do we go about the next stage? How do we go about putting in the veins? Well, the easiest way, as I explained earlier, is to take your dividers and find a vein that is roughly halfway down. You know, so any of these will do. Let's do this one. That one's about halfway. It doesn't matter if it's a bit above or a bit below, but that one starts, it originates here and runs down there. So we've got that measurement there. And the same, let's look at where it kind of comes to an end. And it's about here. So if I make a mark here, I know that that vein is running roughly at that angle. And don't forget also the width of the central vein. It's not a single line, it's a parallel line that tapers there. So we've marked in that first, just clean that up a bit so you can see it. Marked in that first vein. It doesn't run right to the margin, they tend to meet up. So then once we've got that one in, we know it started, just double check it, it originated there. The vein above it starts about there. So we can do the same there to the tip where it divides is about here. So that gives us that angle, and so on. And then we can measure them one at a time. Next one. I've already got kind of an angle to work with. Can't see that one so well. So remember, just draw what you can see with the naked eye. So that gives us a rough pattern where the veins are. There's ones in between as well. I don't need to measure all of these. One of the biggest mistakes I see with leaf drawings is veins that are the wrong angle. They're too straight. You know, they're not. People draw them in sometimes far too abrupt angle from the midrib. So if you measure them like this, so measuring from the origin of the vein to sort of where it disappears, there and there, and start from the middle and work out, it makes it much easier. Now it might seem a bit complicated at the beginning, but you'll soon get the hang of it. And once you get more experience with it, it gets easier. This one actually splits. Again, got one here, and it actually splits down there. Some of them are easier to see than others, so don't worry too much. If you can't see them, it doesn't matter. We just give an indication of where they are, because if you draw too many veins in, it looks overcomplicated and it doesn't look natural. Now these veins meet up before the margin. You can't always see that, but they do. They don't just run to the edge and off the edge. Some veins do in certain plants, but these ones don't. So that's what we end up with. We end up with a nice sort of level of veination in that leaflet that's accurate. Now let's look at that serration around the edge and start to draw that in. And I've drawn generally just a little bit the outer margin. Look at the distance between them. Look how big they are. So that you know that you have the right amount of serration. If you have them too close together or too far apart, then they're not going to look natural. And look, when the vein splits, they kind of run to the tip at that point, but they all split like this. So you've got a serration in the leaf. Something like that. I've got a bit of an overlap there on it now as it looks visually, but when I drew it, it's more like that. So you can hold that leaf down, a little bit of blue tack, white tack, or even your eraser will do it. I'll just push it back to where it was here with a bit of a gap. So it's much easier to put that serration in later, as you can see, and so on. So I'll continue to do that all over the leaf, tidy it up as I go, work on some of the bends and the leaves, and just refine the drawing as it develops. And then you end up with a finished drawing like the one I showed earlier, this one, which shows all the veins in more detail, but not too many veins. You can see those connections between them on this one. And you can see a few of those sort of smaller tertiary veins. And if you plot it like that, heights and widths, positions, angles of the veins, and work your way up gradually, it'll be quite easy to make a simple drawing of a leaf. And you can do the same with flowers, looking at angles, shapes, and plotting and working up gradually, constructing the drawing from the basic components, the geometric components, if you like, of the drawing. So just that final recap then, measure everything, heights and widths. As I say, I know I keep repeating this, but it's so often it's not done. So reinforcement is what this is about. Measure heights and widths of all parts, measure your overall measurements of everything and individual parts overall measurements. Plot in the angles of veins, the width, the distance between leaflets here, down the centre. Each of these distances is very important. Those angles are very important, and then the lengths and the widths in the same way. Look at these, and you can plot in the basic shape, and then start with that vein, starting from one that's around about the middle, marking in the 2 points of where it originates from and where it roughly ends up to give you that curvature of the angle, and then gradually plotting them in individually. Just what you can see with the eye though, not every single vein in detail. Drawing the leaf in a fairly natural position, observing distances between the leaves, double checking all the time. You're cross checking when you're drawing, and you're making the drawing light so that you can erase parts and gradually refine it up until it comes up to a finished stage. Looking for details then, there's actually a sort of groove in the middle here that you can put in, and looking for those finer details, looking at the attachments here and the shapes, and then the serrations around the edge of the leaf, which you can put in as the last part after you've done the veins. And that's basically how to construct a line drawing of a leaf portrait. And then I'll move on and show you some examples of different subjects. But it's a great thing to start with. If you're going to study a plant, you're going to make a sketchbook page of a plant, a leaf portrait is a good place to start if you don't have much experience with drawing.